Hello, it's ShadeX, and today I'll be talking about a Marvel's comic character that not a lot of people know about. The years these comics got published were from 2003 to 2004, and back then, multiple studios were making Marvel films. Fox had X-Men, Universal had Hulk, and Sony had Spider-Man. Movies came out during that time period when I was a kid, and I loved reading comics about them. While I didn't see the X-Men or Hulk film back then, I was still aware of those films when they were out. However, I did watch Spider-Man 2 in theaters, and it was my favorite film growing up. So as a young comic reader, it was no surprise I gravitated towards a series called The Marvelous Adventures of Gus Beezer. The character was created by writer Gail Simone and artist Jason Lethko. What's interesting about this series is that it takes place in the Marvel Universe. In the comics, Gus crossed over with 3 Marvel series: Hulk, X-Men, and Spider-Man. The general formula of these comics is that Gus will pretend to be the Marvel hero at the start, then later on he'll run into the heroes that are on the cover of each issue. While I could go over every issue, I'll instead focus on the Spider-Man crossovers, as they are the ones I fondly remember the most. What is cool about the Gus Beezer comics is that they take place in the mainline 616 Marvel universe. Despite that, comics still exist and Spider-Man movies are being made. The first Spider-Man crossover focuses on Gus wanting to see a Spider-Man film. While Gus views him as a hero, his mother mentions how the Daily Bugle calls him a bad guy. The plot of the comic is about Gus being dragged to a family reunion. He imagines being Spider-Man at the event and his relatives as Spider-Man's villains. This comic reminds me of Calvin and Hobbes, but if it was set in the Marvel Universe. I wouldn't be surprised if this comic was influenced by that. The comic is nothing out of the ordinary until we learn something big. Peter Parker is at the family reunion and is revealed to possibly be Gus Beezer's distant cousin. Peter tells him he knows Spider-Man and Gus Beezer fanboys. Peter then gives him a ball of webbing as a gift. Gus, being the devious kid he is, of course, throws the web in his sister Emily's room. That was the first crossover. It's a fun story. However, what followed was the final Gus Beezer issue that Spider-Man appeared in, and the last one overall, which is my favorite. What makes this comic great is the change in art style. The previous artist was Jason Lethko, who did a decent job. He did art for the first 3 issues of the comic. It's a style that matches the tone of the comic. The first 3 Gus Beezer comics have a art style that reminds me of a children's book. However, the final issue had a different artist. That artist being the art group Guru Hiru. They are the art team for the Gwenpool comic. While this was prior to Gwenpool, the Gus Beezer comics have a similar theme. While I haven't read Gwenpool, she is a comic fan who enters the 616 universe. Gus Beezer, on the other hand, is a comic fan who originated in the 616 universe. I'm glad Guru Hiru worked on this comic, and that they continued making art for Marvel years later. Anyway, what's the comic about? Well, it starts with Gus Beezer fantasizing as being Spider-Man again. Then it's revealed he won a race. He gloats about it constantly, however, soon his sister beats him in a race by distracting him. This, of course, annoys Gus. Following that, he goes to the Daily Bugle to meet his cousin Peter Parker for career day. What I love most about this comic is that he gets to interact with J. Jonah Jameson. Gus hears what he's saying about Spider-Man and Peter has to restrain him since he's pissed. It's really funny.
What's that nonsense I heard you tell the kid about superheroes being noble? Why, these so-called heroes are nothing but attention-grabbing menaces. And the worst one, the very worst, is that no-good glory-hugging Spider-Man.
I think it's time we were going, Mr. Jameson. Thank you for that inspiring message. It's okay, Peter. You can put me down. I won't strangulate. And
Parker, why aren't you out there getting me shots of that lousy criminal Spider-Man?
He evil, say, spider, bad. This is completely unnecessary. I was only going to discuss the matter with that crazy, dangerous, weird-haired lunatic politely. Gus, I'm sorry. We know he's wrong about Spider-Man, but that lunatic is my boss. Do you understand?
I really like how Peter disagrees with what J. Jonah Jameson is saying about Spider-Man, but he still respects him as his boss. Anyway, Peter realizes crime is going on, so he leaves Gus with J. Jonah Jameson. What follows is Gus going off on him. It's really funny.
Where do you get off calling great heroes like Spidey a menace? I tell you who's the menace. That haircut's a menace.
What the devil?
You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Spider-Man has saved the city probably 50 times. And he has cool webbing. Do you have any cool webbing? I thought not.
Parker!
And another thing. How come your dumb newspaper points out all the comics so small? I mean, I need a magnifying glass to read them.
Parker!
Sorry guys, figured three's a crowd.
Anyway, the story ends with Gus getting a signed pick of Spider-Man and him finally beating his sister in a race. The story ends with the promise of more Gus Beezer stories in the future. Unfortunately, the character hasn't come back since 2004. Overall, Gus Beezer is a fun read. I find the detail of Gus being distant cousins with Peter really interesting. I really hope Gus Beezer can get revived in a new comic series of some sort. I like the idea of a young superhero fan in the Marvel Universe. It would have been great seeing the series continue with Guru Hero's art, but unfortunately it didn't. Regardless, the Gus Beezer Spider-Man crossovers are great and are very memorable. If you can track down the issues, I highly recommend reading them. This has been ShadeX, and I hope you all feel nothing but good vibes.
We're under the influence of low pressure and this weather front pushing north.